Hi, I'm Hal. Welcome back to my channel. And today I wanted to go through all of the books that I ended up reading in July. Just a little wrap up. I ended up reading 10 books in July, which is great because I was a little bit behind on my reading goal. And that is in the form of 4 audiobooks, 4 ebooks, and 2 physical books as well. And these are all books that I have gotten out of the library this month, as it tends to be. The first book that I ended up finishing in July was Brighter Than Scale, Swifter Than Flame by Neon Yang. This is like a fantasy short story novella type book. We are following our main character Eva, who when she's like a young girl shows some like magical dragon fighting abilities, and she gets sent to the like capital to become this like dragon knight. And she's really good at it, and she ends up spending her entire time in this armor that these dragon knights fight in for, you know, gender and like mixed race reasons. The story starts with her being sent to the neighbouring kingdom of Chambao, where they are apparently harbouring a dragon, and it gets a bit more complicated from there because also this is the place where her mother came from, so there's obviously a conversation there as well. I did enjoy this. I knew exactly where this book was going from kind of the beginning of it, but I did have a very good time, which is always fun because I have previously read the first book in the Tensorate series and I really enjoyed that, and then I more recently read the Genesis of Misery, which I did not really enjoy. So whilst I would say that both the Genesis of Misery and Brighter Than Scale, Swifter Than Flame, I like knew what was going on, I felt like because this was a short story, we were getting through those beats a little bit quicker and I could more, you know, focus on the writing style and kind of the flavour of the world, if that makes sense. They are very different stories, but they do have the like, maybe this character doesn't actually know what's really going on in this world kind of thing going on with them, if that makes sense, without obviously spoiling either of these books. I had a great time. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I think it was very enjoyable. The next book that I ended up reading was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a non-fiction book. I would describe this as like a series of essays or thoughts that both kind of following Robin Wall Kimmerer's like life story and her work as like an environmental advocate and a ecologist, and they're all kind of around the theme of our relationship with the natural world and how we can improve that. One of her big ideas that she's discussing in this book is this idea of like a gift economy instead of, you know, like a more capitalist one, which is coming from her kind of background as part of the Potawatomi Nation as well, and how that's a more reciprocal way of like interacting with the world, and it's not all just taking, because humans are an important part of the ecosystem as well. This was really good. I can't describe to you how I spent the entire time I was listening to this just walking to work crying over this like very sweet woman whispering in my ear about how we should look after the world more. Like, and not that there weren't bits that, you know, you had to like reflect on and really think, and how is there a way that I can, you know, make small steps. But like, yeah, I really enjoyed this. I will say that I was expecting something different out of this book. I do read a lot of sciencey, pop sci, non-fiction books, so I was expecting a little bit more in that bent. There is one of the chapters in this book, in I think about the middle of the book, where she is discussing the story of her and one of her students doing this research project to see if sweetgrass grew better when it was being harvested, and if it was, which one of these like traditional harvesting techniques worked better to help the growth of sweetgrass. And the chapter is set up like a scientific study, and I thought that was great, and I really enjoyed that chapter. It's obviously stuck out to me. but I thought that that kind of vibe was going to be more of the book, which is not the case. But I do think what that book is still really good. It is like some of these stories in these books are personal and more biographical, and I think because of that it does fall into a pitfall that I have because I'm nitpicky and annoying, which is when someone's speaking from a place of experience and saying something that obviously, you know, they're linking it to various aspects of their own history and understanding, but it's being put across as if it was like a true statement around the world. This is happening when she's talking about language, and how language talks about objects, and whether that language has a way of talking about objects animately or if they're all inanimate. So there are some languages where things like trees are still animate. And to do this, she's kind of comparing Potawatomi and English, those being the two languages that she has links to. However, because I am a little gremlin of a person, I did spend the entire time going, well, there's more languages that exist in this world. So like, if you are also sensitive to being nitpicky, there's a couple of moments of that. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was really good. I had a great time. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Faithbreaker by Hannah Kaner. This is the 3rd and final book in the God Killer series. In this series, we're following kind of 3 main characters. Carson, who is a God Killer in a world that recently went to war with the gods, and so her trade has now become a lot more common and like legalized. Inara, who is a little girl who is bound to a god, Skediseth, the god of white lies, and wants to work out what's going on with that. And Elogast, who is like an ex-knight who has a complicated relationship with his king, supported him but didn't agree with him going to war with the gods, and so they've had this like messy falling out. In the first book, Elogast gets sent on like one final task by the king, whereas Inara and Carson are working together to try and work out what's going on with Skediseth and kind of everything there, and they end up meeting and working together, and things get a lot more complicated. I have a complicated relationship with these books. The first 2 books, I had a real issue with how this author has written the relationship between these characters. Apart from the relationship between like Inara and Skediseth, I was struggling to believe that these characters actually cared about each other, and I think that's a major failure point in your, work as a book, especially when you are doing things like having a complicated relationship between a king and a knight, which I came out of that first book going, there is no homoeroticism here. As like a brought up shipper, like, if I couldn't see anything there, it meant that like, you weren't presenting that to me at all. Which then meant, in the second book, when that is much more of a theme, I was really annoyed by that, because it was like almost backhanded, like, oh, you didn't write this properly into the first book, so now you're trying to make up for it in the second book. So yeah, I think by this point, when I've got into the third book, any annoyance over the like, what I perceived as backpedaling in terms of Aaron's and Elogast's relationship didn't annoy me as much, which was great, because that continued to be a theme here. And also, I was a little bit more, I was going into this with lowered expectations, because I was like, I didn't enjoy, really. I thought the first 2 books were just kind of okay. I'm just interested in seeing how the story wraps up, and honestly, continuing to be a little bit of a bitch about these books, with standing on having finished all 3 books rather than like, not having all the pieces of information. And I am happy to report that I did enjoy this book more than the previous 2. I felt like Hannah Kaner has improved in how she is writing these characters and the relationship between them. I felt like the ending was good and very satisfying, and, tied up a lot of things. It did make me a little bit emotional. However, I don't think I should have had to drag through two very mediocre books that I had major issues with to get to a book that is decent. And that's my overall feeling about this series. So I gave this book, in the end, 3 stars, but overall, I wouldn't recommend this series. I would give it, it would be 2 stars overall. It was okay. I don't think it's worth your time, in all honesty. The next book that I ended up finishing was the Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth. This is a young adult fantasy book. We're set in a slightly, alternative 1980s. We're following our main character, Susan, who lives on the outskirts of Bath, but she's going down to London for the summer before she starts her university degree at an art college on a kind of a mission to try and find out who her father was, because she has never met the guy. And then when she gets there, she kind of ends up being dragged into this magical world of the booksellers and kind of magical creatures. There are basically right-handed booksellers that do all of the research and investigation and a little bit of magic, whereas your left-handed booksellers are more of your frontline fighters and things like that. So she ends up being very central to kind of a weird plot that's unfolding, and meets, a couple of people that then become also kind of major characters in these books. One of my favourite is Merlin. He is a left-handed bookseller, and this man is obsessed with clothes and will cross-dress for absolutely no reason. Or more accurately, the reason being he enjoys doing this. If this man was in 2025, I truly believe he would be gender fluid in a real way, or at least doing what he's currently doing, but with a bit more of a label. And we also have Vivian, who is Merlin's sister, which is also a great mix to put into this book, because there's periods where both Susan and Vivian are absolutely done with Merlin's shit. There's a little bit of a romance between Merlin and Susan as well. It's just really fun. The thing is, Garth never misses. He's always good at what he does. And I really enjoyed it. I felt all the references to, obviously the real world of the 1980s was fun, but also the little bits of alternate history that we got to learn a little bit about were also very fun. Very minor thing, but they mentioned the Vickers Cross 10 in this. I love planes, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. I had a really fun time with this. I then also picked up the second book in this series, the Sinister Booksellers of Bath. We follow a very similar idea. It's now about, the first book was set in the summer, we're now in about Christmas time, and Susan is kind of unwillingly dragged back into this world when a new threat kind of comes that kind of wants to get at her specifically again. She's not having the best of luck. So Susan, Merlin and Vivian kind of have to band back together to, defeat the threat that's coming after her. This was also, again, it was really fun. I will say that I had a couple more issues being focused on this audiobook than I did with the first audiobook. I don't know if they're because they're quite similar stories, and they are for a slightly younger audience, so I felt like there was a little bit of repetition, but overall I did still have a good time, but I am rating this 3 stars rather than the 4 stars for the first book. I am definitely interested in continuing this series and just kind of picking them up as a fun audiobook on the side. The next book that I ended up picking up was the Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennet. I did have this as a physical book from the library, but I had to return it before I could film this video because someone else wanted to read it. So this is a fantasy murder mystery book. We're following our main character, Dinios Cole, who is an assistant in training that has recently been assigned to Anna Delobra, who is like the eccentric investigator. I think one thing that sets this book apart from a lot of others is that we're in a really cool fantasy world. We're in this world where like we're in a walled city with various walls to kind of protect them against like big kaiju type beasts that are coming out of the ocean. At a certain point of the year, there's like a season where they kind of try and batter themselves against the defenses. And also a lot of things in this world are done by magical plants. There's specifically a plant mentioned in this book, which basically works as like an air conditioning unit, but it's a mushroom. So like, that's the vibe. We have some magical abilities. So Cole is an engraver. He goes into a room and he will remember every single thing that happened in that room, every single word in a conversation. It all gets like engraved onto his memory. But yeah, there's a murder mystery. There is a commander that was killed by a plant literally sprouting out of him, and Cole gets sent to, basically do the main part of the investigation. He is in a room, he is, talking to witnesses, he's taking everything in, and then he goes back and reports all the information to Anna, who is very, eccentric, neurodivergent coded. She likes to sit in her room with a blindfold on. Sometimes she needs to climb into a suitcase to like not be overwhelmed. And the investigation kind of goes on from there. We were in a couple of different locations, and yeah, it was a really fun time. Robert Jackson Bennet understands what he's doing with like an investigative duo, which is both of these people need to be insane. Even if one of them is acting as like the straight man or the like Watson type character, Watson is still insane. And that's incredibly important to the vibe, and that vibe was here in a real way. I had a really good time. I thought the world was super interesting. I thought the mystery was really well done. I am very excited to hopefully read the next book in this series, because there was a little excerpt in my book that I picked up, and it looks like it's going to be like a locked room type mystery, which is always interesting and fun. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I had a really good time. The next book that I picked up was Autobiography of Red by Carson. I picked this up as an audiobook, but it's a really interesting little book. The beginning of it is Carson's translation of Stacey Chorus's poem Garyon, or whatever it's actually called, but it's about a little boy with 6 wings called Garyon, little red boy, who is killed by Hercules. And then the next part, which is I think the majority of the book, is like Carson's like more modern day retelling of this story, and trying to do some fun things with that story. Obviously this was published in like the 90s, so when I say modern, I do mean modern for the 90s. We're kind of in a weird space and time kind of thing, but I did enjoy this. I just didn't think that it was like anything extraordinary. I just generally thought it was okay, especially the story. I did more enjoy the translation at the beginning of this book, I will say. But yeah, I don't have a huge amount to talk about because I just thought it was okay, and because of that I ended up giving it 2 stars. But it did its job as a little audiobook to listen to. The next book that I ended up reading was Yield Under Great Persuasion by Alexandra Rowland. This is a gay fantasy romance. We are following our 2 main characters, Tamerlane or Tam Beckett, and Lord Nicolau Lyford. The setup for this, I need to do my little... What if we were both boys, and when we were like 9 and I was growing a giant marrow plant for the goddess of love, fertility and the harvest, Angrad, it got smashed into 100 little pieces by the other boy, and now you, Tam, have lived with a burning hatred for Lyford, and you feel like this has set up a pattern in your life where you try really hard to do things and you fail and no one comforts you, and so you hate this man, but also you have been sleeping together for the past 10 years. Do not worry about it. So that's the vibe. Bit of a complicated relationship, and we basically start this story where Tam kind of reaches a breaking point. He basically gets told to pull his shit together by the goddess Angarad and stop, like, yanking Lyford around by with his feelings, and maybe actually have a human conversation with this man and talk about your feelings and how you still feel sad about that incident when you were 9. And so Lyford then sends him on a couple of quests to go on as well, and that's the story. It's a story about Tam trying to be a better person, but he is at his core a terrible goblin. And it's really fun. It's really funny. Whatever humor Alexander Rowland has, unfortunately it's the same one as mine. But it's also very earnest, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that it's difficult to try and be better, and that's a process, and sometimes you will backslip, but it's still important to try. But yeah, there are a couple of warnings that I wanted to mention. One of them is, as you maybe could tell from the summary of this book, there are a couple of sex scenes in this book. There's a lot of sex, like sexual innuendos and references to sex as well. So if that's something that you need a warning about, there you go. And then as well, there's a little bit to the storyline, which is where there's a baby who, like, might be unwell and not doing great. I want to point out, the baby is fine. Anything that does happen gets sorted out. Don't worry about the baby. I was pretty sure when I got to the baby part that it was all going to turn out fine, but Tam is very worried about this baby, and so you are also very worried about this baby, but the baby is fine. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I absolutely devoured this. I usually read about 65 pages of, like, an ebook or a physical book a day, and I was reading like almost 100 pages of this a day. And I finished it, and then I had to go immediately back to read it again. I had a great time. I will say that the ending felt a little bit abrupt on my first read through, but because I knew that was coming up on my second time, I was much happier with how it ended, if that makes sense. But yeah, I had a great time. I gave this 5 stars. It's not the masterpiece of literature, but I had such a fun time with it. The next book that I ended up reading was the Warriors graphic novel, The Prophecy Begins #2, which is obviously adapted from the work by Erin Hunter, with Natalie Rees and Sarah Gotter as illustrators. So we're kind of picking up where the story left off. So the big story in these books is that we're following our main character, Rusty. He decides to run away from his life as a house pet to go into the woods and join the warrior cats that live in the woods, where he becomes firepaw, and he's working his way up from, like, a trainee to, like, a full warrior cat, things like that. In this book, we do see him get a lot more responsibility. He ends up being the deputy for ThunderClan, the clan that he's a part of. We're seeing, having to deal with both, like, internal pressures and problems within his clan, as well as external pressures and problems between the clans. We meet a couple of new characters, and, there's bits of action, there's bits that are really sad. It was a good time overall. I will say that I didn't get into this book as easily as I did the first graphic novel, just because I could not remember who a lot of these cats were. There was no easy, like, here are cats if you've forgotten, which I would have needed because I did forget who these cats were. But it was still fun. It was still a quick read. I do really enjoy the art style. I think it is still really funny to see these little cat drawings viciously attack each other. I will say that. But yeah, I'm having a good time. I am interested in continuing this story as the rest of the graphic novels come out. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. And then the last book that I read this month was Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen. I still have a copy. I still had this book before it's due back to the library. I think it's a pretty standard thing, but it does have, like, these, like, kind of deep pink edges, which I think are a lovely colour. So this is a YA book. We're following, like, these 2 characters who have reincarnated across time and kind of the world, and every time they do, they find each other and they end up you know, often falling in love but having to kill each other before their 18th birthday. In this book, basically set up, we're following our kind of modern day storyline in 2025 with Evelyn, the like soul, who obviously has a different name every body that they are born into. She is a teenage girl living in Wales. Her younger sister is currently struggling with cancer, and she is desperate to, you know, be able to give her sister like a bone marrow transplant before she inevitably gets killed. So she is wanting to live as long as possible, even, you know, can she live past her 18th birthday to try and get this done for her. She's on the lookout for who Arden, who is the other soul that gets reincarnated, has become in this current life. And then interspersed with that main story, we also get flashbacks to various of their lives throughout time, usually at the point when one of them is killing the other, and it's usually Arden killing Evelyn. So yeah, this was very fun. This did read as very young adult, I will say, and it was one of those books where it was such a like mix of certain parts of this book had parts where I was going, I don't know why this has to be a young adult novel. I think it would be really interesting and give a little bit more depth to these characters if they were able to get a little bit older than 18. Obviously, they know about their past lives and stuff, but they're still, and this is the other thing, at certain points they were still making decisions that were absolutely the kind of stupid decisions that only teenagers can make. And so it's that balance of, I think they had to be teenagers so that the plot and those stupid decisions made sense, because I wouldn't be able to suspend my disbelief if it was something older than 18 had made those decisions. But it obviously, because it's young adult, whilst there are some really interesting discussions and themes being brought up, we're not getting to like, I think some of them that we could have been able to get to if they were older than 18 years old. The other thing is, I am sure reading this book that Laura Stephen is around the same age that I am, which I'm 27, because the sense of humour and some of the references that she made in this book read very like, you are in my same age group in a real way, including the fact, which I'm gonna point out because this is something that grinds my gears, is that she uses the pop sci fun fact, which is incorrect, that the frontal lobe stops developing at age 25. That's when it's like fully developed. That's not what that study found. They just stopped measuring that once the participants were aged 25, when in reality that probably continues to develop throughout your entire life. I'm a bitch about this in a real way. There's certain pop sci fun facts that I'm like, that's not true, and I'm gonna point it out as well. But yeah, I had a good time with this. I felt that Evelyn and Arden were very interesting characters. They obviously reincarnate in various time periods, in various social situations, in various bodies. They're not always a girl and a boy as well. And so that led them, you know, there are some interesting discussions and things that happen with that. But I also liked that they had traits that were specific to them, that were still there time after time, which I do think is, you know, accurate for people, even if they are, like, immortal, basically. But yeah, nothing groundbreaking, but I had a good time with it, and I ended up giving this 3 stars as well. That is everything that I read this past month. A couple of them were quite short because I was, you know, I mean, part of it was that's how the cards fell, but also I was trying to catch up a little bit on my reading goals. At the moment, I am reading Hammerjang Luck, as well as listening to Reforged as an audiobook. I knew Reforged is by Seth Haddon. I cannot remember the author's name for Hammerjang Luck without it having it written down. So that's what I'm currently reading. I think I do have some library hauls coming up. Hopefully the library is also purchasing a couple of books for me to read the next one in the series. So if those come through anytime soon, I'll probably be picking those up as well. But yeah, that's everything, I think, for July. I hope that you're having a nice day, that you've been reading some nice books. Bye!